And today is something I'm very interested and excited about hearing about. It's something that we have all lived. This global pandemic has been an interesting experience for the entire world. And our societies have gone through this difficult period. At different times, we have seen the surge and different ways people, governments, and businesses have responded. Now, Italy stands out as an interesting case because it experienced the effects of the pandemic, a surge in the infections very early, and paid a hefty price. Yet Italians have come around, have, I think, met the challenge, have overcome the challenge, and displayed quite a bit of what we call cultural resilience. Resilience in the sense that the ability to overcome adversity, to manage difficult situations. It's very interesting what happened also a couple of months ago in Italy. Everyone will remember the collapse of the Morandi Bridge. Morandi Bridge in Genoa collapsed a couple of years ago. You'll all recall quite a few lives were lost there. Remarkably, the Italians rebuilt the bridge in less than 2 years and under very difficult circumstances. And they inaugurated just a couple of months ago. So there's something to be said about resilience. And so that's the topic, our topic today. The general takeaway here is that it's actually, we're living a very interesting time for social scientists. Whether you're a business scholar or an economist, political scientist, sociologist, anthropologist, this is a live laboratory that one can observe and take lessons. So what we are doing here with the help of our two good Italian colleagues is looking at the experience of the Italians, both at the individual level as well as government and business level, and see how they overcome adversity and unique ways in which they address the problem. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. So I'm looking forward to a very good dialogue with Dr. Giovanna Maniani from the University of Pavia, and also Francesca Sanguinetti from University of Pavia as well, also at Georgia State, because she's just joined Georgia State as well, about to finish her PhD at the University of Pavia. And then we have a commentator with us, a colleague, a distinguished colleague, Dr. Şeyda Deligönül from New York. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Francesca, and we'll get the conversation started. I'm sure we'll have some good comments and questions from the participants as well. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, Tamer Hoja, and I take the opportunity to welcome all our attendees and to thank CIBER at GSU for organizing these interesting webinars. So thank you, Tamer Hoja, Hannah, and Rebecca for organizing it. So I'm pretty sure we are all well familiar with the pandemic and with what has been happening in the past months. So I will just spend a few minutes and say a few words to introduce today's topic. So at the very beginning of this pandemic, we have seen two main first reactions. On one side, we have seen countries like China, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore that responding by curbing the spread of the virus, trying to restrain to some extent the individual freedom. On the other side, we had a more liberal approach aiming at protecting the economic interest first. But this trade-off between the public health and devastating business failure, it's not something that surprises historians. I'm sure you all read about the cholera pandemic, but just to spend a few words, the cholera pandemic of the 19th century already saw an international debate about whether approaching with a quarantining approach or not. Well, Italians already at that time were of course, fighting and debating inside, but they ended up by deciding to increase the hygienic condition, the sanitization, and they decided for a quarantining approach. So history is supposed to teach us, but it seemed that we took actions a little bit too late this time. The world was still in the middle between denial and overreactions. And these patterns were exacerbated by a lack of information, or maybe by contradictory informations that were coming from the news. So what are we going to do today? We're going to look at the reactions at the three levels of the society, so public sector, business level, and individual level, and we're going to try to respond with cultural resilience lenses. So cultural resilience comes from the ecological science, and it's very well used in the psychology literature. But just to give you an understanding of what it actually is, cultural resilience looks at the influence of the cultural factors on individuals and communities in coping with adversities. So with this introduction, I yield the floor to Giovanna to start with public sector and the cultural resilience.
Thank you, Francesca, and also on my side, thanks a lot, Cyber, for this opportunity, and hello, everybody. Well, I want to first of all start, as Francesca said, with the public sector takeaways that we can get from the Italian experience. Well, Italy's response to COVID-19 was strict and early. The government announced a series of stringent measures, and the national lockdown announced on March 9 banned everything from shops, of course, except pharmacies and food markets, to strolls in the parks and all the non-essential economic activities. Violators would have forced jail time up to 3 months and quite heavy fines. So many people argue that this response was the most aggressive after China's. And fingers crossed, it seems that until now it has worked quite well. So I think that there are at least 5 takeaways that are worthy of our attention. The first one is that Italy and the Italian government has decided to prioritize citizens' health and well-being. While some other countries, like for instance the UK, took initial decisions to privilege economic and financial considerations, Italy made sure to focus first on the fundamental right to life and the well-being of citizens. The second one is a focus, I would say, on flexibility and on taking an integrated approach. And here I refer to the capacity of reorganize, orchestrate resources and capabilities in order to deliver important tools and machines to fight against the virus. So I will touch upon this point also later on when I will speak about business-related coping strategies, but yes, many larger and smaller organizations basically reorganize their operations in order to deliver tools and machineries. The third one is the development of an effective emergency logistics system. Quite quickly, we've been able, for example, to develop so-called COVID hospitals, dedicated hospitals to the COVID disease throughout the countries, and emergency transportation system. Helicopters literally have saved thousands of lives. The fourth takeaway is an emphasis on professional responsibilities, and this is peculiar to the Italian culture that gives extreme importance to professional responsibilities in critical professions such as nurses, medical doctors, and public servants. And I would say that these emerged quite with a lot of evidence during the emergency. Just to make an example, the Italian Civil Protection made a call requesting 500 volunteer nurses, and just in 48 hours it received more than 9,000 applications. We cannot also forget about, among the many exceptional cases, that of Giampiero Giron, who is an 85 years old retired medical doctor who decided to go back to service because he just never forgot the oath he made when he was younger to save humanity. The fifth takeaway is that we as government try to use a coordinated international response. So early the first week of February, our Italian Ministry of Public Health organized the first extraordinary assembly between all the health ministries in the European Union to ask for an integrated European Union approach. Unfortunately, his voice was left quite unheard, but now we know that later in May and June, the European Union has made a lot of steps ahead in order to fight the economic crisis especially, and we are waiting for the recovery fund to be distributed to Italy and to other countries. Of course, we've had also a lot of problems, and among these I would like to touch upon the problem of lack of preparation, because basically, as many other countries, we didn't have a pandemic plan, a national pandemic plan. And this was extremely evident in the manufacturing of personal protective equipment. In this respect, we have coped with a problem of a lack of coordination between the Italian civil protection and regional authorities in order to actually place order and distribute PPEs. So procurement in general, also from this point of view, I would say that in Italy there is a culture that try to avoid the risk of fraud in public procurement, and this of course goes against sometimes the efficiency and the effectiveness and innovation. So this is a cultural point in terms of procurement that I wanted to stress. The last issue that we face is a cybersecurity issue. And it was the April the 1st when our INPS, which is the National Department of Social Security, has been forced offline after a cyber attack. It was the first day when VAT registered and self-employed Italians could have applied for a 600 payment, and which was part of a coronavirus relief package. But as I told you, we went through this hard problem of cybersecurity. So that's it on my side. I would like to hear about Sheida's opinion on this matter.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. As you said, we're dealing with pros and cons. We're dealing with yin and yang. Disruptions are, technically speaking, disequilibrium points. It's impossible to predict them. It's impossible to easily pull out of yourself from the black hole. We criticize the institutional reaction to the events, but I will propose that it's not easy to answer some of the questions. As you said, there are two sides to this coin. Under the cultural resilience theory, I will offer you 5 different trade-offs. And these trade-offs are why it is so difficult to pull out of this black hole. One is the psychological one. How can you prevent the panic and at the same time become transparent? If you're transparent, people know that what the extent of this huge interruption. Number 2, after the psychological trade-off, the second one, institutional trade-off. You have incredible number of rules, and if you're you know, in school, like us in academy, you know that the purpose right now is not around. People are focusing on rules. In these times, usually the purpose disappears, the rules replace them. So that's the institutional trade-off. Number three, welfare trade-off. This is economy versus public health. If you close the economy, you save the public. If you open the economy, then the pandemic transmits and you know, spreads faster than you can think of. Morale trade-off. People in these times feel like they're an expense item. There are not humans, but usually there is a fear of some sense of being reduced, and that creates resentment. One side you have the resentment, on the other side effectiveness. It is not easy to be effective and at the same time prevent the resentment. So difficult. Americans are spending $130 billion aid package for small businesses, and the press reports that only 1.5% of that ended up in the deserving small firms. Number five, well-being trade-off. Today's spending is tomorrow's welfare. Basically, this particular pandemic is a tax. So if you borrow today, somebody is going to pay in the future, and there is no escape from this dilemma. Now, with facing these five different trade-offs, you can use different lenses to find yourself in a particular position. One is that, for instance, the simplest one, geography and traffic. Italy is number 3 most popular destination of tourist traffic. Number 3 in the world. They receive 62 million people every year. Number 1 and number 2 are China and United States. Now, with that kind of a traffic and geography, makeup of the geography, certainly you have different answers to balances that those 5 different trade-offs. For instance, you want to be in Canada during this pandemic because the population density in Canada is 4 people every kilometer square. You don't want to be in Japan because it's 347. Italy is 206. There are 206 people in every kilometer. So depending on the geography, you have different exposure to these 5 different trade-offs. I will just go over the others fast. Political lens. The incumbent position against these particular questions are very different than governing party. Number 3, social lens. You look at this problem from the cultural point of view, from the perspective of traditions and norms. Number 4, you forget about everything else. You become just a finance person and you look at it as a financial and economic dilemma. Number 5, you become a doctor and you look at it from the lens of medicine and biology. So by looking at, depending on who you are, you have different positions for those 5 different dilemmas. And not surprisingly, the countries have been spending very different amounts of money, trillions and trillions of corona spending. In, for instance, Italy, it is $105 billion. In USA, 2.71 trillion. That is 12 zeros after 2. In Canada, it's 260. In Germany, 350 billion. These are huge numbers. The entire GDP of Bolivia is 40 billion, less than $40 billion. So Italians could buy Bolivia more than 2 times instead of spending all that money on COVID. And that's, I have a couple more comments, but I will, I've been taking up too much time, so I'll use them later on.
Shada, that's very good. The dilemmas, the trade-offs that you are introducing here are very real. And we have seen different countries deal with these dilemmas, the choices in different ways. With respect to your economic trade-off, we've seen, for example, in the United States, each state had a different attitude, different position, making this choice between safety and health and getting the economy, keeping the economy going and dynamic. So we've seen that diversity even within the same country in the United States. But these are very real, and it makes it very difficult for the public sector. I mean, regardless of how you go, which way you lean towards, you are going to make some people unhappy. So you're going to see, I think one of the things we have seen, actually division of opinions, and also people moving this way or that way and taking strong stands on these issues. So we have not seen a unified approach because they are dilemmas, they are trade-offs. We know that at the end of the day, everybody is going to be happy about it.
By the way, consensus for Italians is impossible, right? Guys, in Italy, there are 29 small parties and 6 major parties. And democracy is quite unstable just for differences of opinion. That's part of the Mediterranean culture.
Yes, so let's start with the business side of cultural resilience and reaction to COVID, at least the Italian case again. And here I would like to point out 2 things. The first one is that we could observe a lot of entrepreneurial flexibility and proactiveness, not only in larger firms, but also in smaller organizations. For example, an example is the Italian Siare Engineering International Group, which is one of the 4 companies in the world producing lung ventilators. This firm has integrated into its organization a team of military engineers in order to guarantee a 24-hour production. But we have hundreds of other similar examples in the country of integration, as I was mentioning before, between also the Italian Civil Protection Department and smaller firms or local volunteers. Another example worth mentioning is the Italian fashion sector. Companies like Valentino, Calzedonia, Geox, and Prada have quickly moved to the production of masks and other materials useful to cope, to help sanitary professionals and the population at large. We will never forget about the entrepreneur who converted a Decathlon sportswear diving mask into a respirator, and you see the picture in the slide. But another example is also Giorgio Armani, who converted all the Italian production plants into the production of disposable gowns intended for the individual protection of health workers. The second thing that I would like to point out, and that I could observe from some data that we were collecting with 2 other colleagues of mine during the lockdown, is the role of Slack resources in smaller enterprises, especially family business, that you probably know are the most part of businesses in Italy, more than of the 90% of businesses in Italy. You may be familiar with the concept of Slack, which has its foundation in Penrose's The Growth of the Firm seminal contribution, seminal book. Slack is potentially utilizable resources that can be diverted or redeployed for the achievement of organizational goals. And of course, there are different types of Slack. We observed two types of Slack that were critical to cope with the crisis in family firms. The first one is financial resources. So in many firms that we interviewed, financial liquidity and a no-debt financial policy have been key to survive during the lockdown. And this was mentioned quite a lot of times by the family firms that we interviewed across a few sectors. So financial resources also is not just liquidity and no debt policy, but also derives from cost efficiency efforts and high margins that these firms have. The other type of Slack resource that we have observed and played a role during the crisis is familiness. Again, you might already be familiar with this term, but with familiness, I refer to the idiosyncratic bundle of resources and capabilities resulting from the interaction between the firm and the business system. So also in this case, our interviewees a lot of time refer to familiness as being a help in the decision-making process during the lockdown. The decision-making process was regarded as easier and flower because family was regarded as relevant not to give up. It's a hint, not only a financial hint, but also an emotional and a psychological hint. It allows to feel safer and not to feel alone in dealing with the shock. That's it. Francesca, floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like just to add a few things from this business level reactions. So if we look at the businesses, we can see, apart from those businesses that were forced out of business, we can see two main reactions. On one side, we have those firms that fall victims of the paralysis, of the immobility, and they felt that everything was doom and gloom, and they've been waiting for the state or other institutions to actually help them, to tell them what to do to survive. On the other side, instead, we have those firms, among those the ones that Giovanna already mentioned before, that actually proactively responded to such a catastrophic situation. However, they did it also thanks to their cultural resilience by grasping from their experiences, by grasping from their cultural identities and their traditions. Among these, we've seen the conversion of agile production lines, and the example of the Italian fashion industry is one of the most easily recognizable, as it was easier on one side for them to convert their production lines, and they did it. What is even interesting is that they did it with a social responsibility point of view. As a matter of fact, some of them also reused what was their waste and would have been, of course, wasted or thrown away. For example, they reused the textile to create the masks, or they have been previously already started working on this, but they are finalizing the coming out of materials that are compostable. So they are readapting their production line, but also with some sort of attention to the social responsibility as well. What we've seen, it's not simply those big companies, but also micro and small firms, micro and small enterprises, they did so. And what it was very interesting was to see the technological boost that we had. So despite the Italian backwardness, I don't know how familiar you are with the Italian business field, but many of our stores and mom and pop stores are very non-technological. But thanks to what happened, on one side, they created their websites, they decided to apply for apps like Deliveroo or other grocery shops apps. So they took a step toward technological boosts. Also, something that is interesting, and we have seen it, for example, for our farmers, instead of selling to their grocery stores that will sell to the customers, with this technological boost, they actually forgot the step of the grocery shops and arrive directly to the customer. It is a way that helped them integrating and directly arrive to their customers. So after having touched these points, I would be very interested in learning what does Shada Hoja has to say about this.
Thank you, Francesca. As Francesca and Joanna indicated, this interruption on the supply chain basically collapsed the supply process, and the operational plants and the manufacturing facilities came to halt. Financially, revenue streams dried up, and markets were shaken up, and discretionary income is no longer flowing into the markets, and unemployment is even making it more serious. So this is a war against a tiny virus. In war, you don't go and create a game script. In my institution, people are trying to cover every aspect of possible threats. We're talking about whether the masks are hand washed or machine washed, etc. This is not the way to deal with it. Companies deal with this kind of interruptions with strategies, not game scripts. Strategies first ask the question if this particular event is a temporal disruption or it is a structural change. If it's temporal, it's just a shock. Probably it's going to kill a lot of firms, but somehow it is possible to create strategies and be able to handle or tackle the difficulties. I'm not going to go into, you developed that strategy in 3 phases as Francesca explained, but I will just give you a couple of ideas what I mean by being able to deal and tackle with the shock. First, you look at your costs, separate variable costs from the fixed cost. You look at the working capital. That is your balance sheet in the current liabilities minus the current assets. Then you look at your leverage, how much you have in your borrowed purse, the bailout package, etc. Are part of this discussion. But if this is not the shock, and if it's a structural change, the answer is completely different than the other one, because in this case, structural change requires that you change the entire business. Therefore, the biggest question for the firms is to understand or guess or bet on this particular situation. Is it a shock? It's a temporal disruption, or it is a structural change? Now, pandemic is going to be a reset, no matter how you think about it. It could be temporal or structural, but it's going to be a reset. It's going to just kill the weaklings, and the stronger will come out of even stronger from this situation. And an interesting aspect of these kind of periods is that you have wonderful and very good high-value companies will be in the market up for sale with bargain basement prices. In finance research, you can see that the buyouts increases right in the middle of such disruptions. So probably people are looking for opportunities, turning the threats into opportunities by buying out good firms at a very low prices.
Thank you. I mean, we see all of that. And the distinction I think you're making between temporal shocks versus structural changes is very important. This disruption, the health pandemic, and the ensuing global recession sounds to me like the second one. It's going to require structural changes. We're seeing that already in various ways. So this has implications for companies. It's not just makeshift, temporary solutions, knee-jerk reactions, but it's going to be fundamental reactions in terms of re-engineering the organization, thinking about vulnerabilities, threats, and seeing to what extent they can be mitigated, and how can the firm not only do well, but also survive. So you mentioned that a lot of firms are under the threat of survival, and the weak ones will not survive. So this gives management a chance, I think, to rethink and reevaluate. And this is where I think leadership, real leadership will show. Real leadership requires calm, intelligent thinking and solutions to these problems. So we have yet to see that, but we will be observing again. This is a living laboratory. This is real time, and it's ideal for social scientists, all of us in social science, to observe and to draw lessons from. Francesca?
Well, thank you. Really insightful comments, both of you. So let's start moving toward the individual level of this field. Well, an individual level, we know that culture shape an individual's identity and behavior. And together with the tradition, it gives us a sense of belonging. And it is this sense of belonging that helps coping with adversities. Just an interesting thing is that if you look at Google Trends, which tell you the search terms, if you look at Google Trends during the time of the pandemic, you will see that Italians, for example, were searching mainly for the words foods, tradition, roots, or traditional recipes. So they have searched for those terms as there is the need to recreate a familiar nest, especially in times of adversities. The need of feeling the familiarity, the comfort zone, it's something that helps coping with adversity and feel good. So this is partly due to the rediscovery of the roots and traditions, but of course it also finding something useful to do with the free time during the lockdown, for example, and at the same time also staying at home would reduce the money spent and also the risk for contagion. At the same time, since we were looking at roots and traditions, part of our tradition is also being social. So Italians are very well known for their needs of socializing. I don't know, many of you are familiar with our aperitivo, it's our happy hour. And it is basically on our daily lives. And we managed to keep on our traditions while going online with Zoom and other technological video conference tools. But Italians didn't give up their needs for socializing. We just find it an alternative way to do that. Just changing a little bit the point of view, Italians have always been one of those populations with a higher propensity to save. So they were among the population that were saving more. If you look at Istat, which is our, well, the National Institute of Statistics, you can see that after the crisis of 2008 to 2009, this propensity to save has been lowering its trend. However, now, just after the lockdown, it seemed to have been going back to increasing the propensity to saving. I would just want to finish with something a little ironical. So the pandemic has turned the perception of the country upside down. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that northern and southern people do not really like each other, or not too much. So especially northern Italians were used to dislike people from the south. But now, especially at the beginning, the northern people were seeing as the plague spreader. Everything started in the north. So southern people didn't want them. And something that we've seen just now, as in summer, the southern region got the tourists, and northern people started to reappreciate this part of the country. And it's definitely up until December, and maybe even later, people from the south do not want to go back to the north. And thanks to smart working and the moving online, maybe this is a trend that will happen. So after this, I yield the floor to Giovanna to finishing with the individual level responses to the crisis.
Yes, thank you, Francesca. I would like to add a few things to what you said, and I would like to point out to the fact that throughout the lockdown, as individuals, we have been challenged by new work-life balance. We've been confined in our homes. We were not permitted to leave for essential reasons. So if on the one hand, some of us felt bored, others experienced workloads, work overloads. So according to a few statistics, in Italy, working hours have spiked since the onset of the crisis. And I've been talking with a lot of friends and professionals, and on average, they've been working at least 2-3 hours more a day during weekends and during Easter time and holidays. So this is exceptionally challenging, of course, from the psychological point of view for many reasons. One of the reasons is that that the division between public life and private life is very limited when you're doing working from home. And the other thing is that, again, in my opinion, there is an issue in terms of scarcity versus lack of resources that emerged quite evidently in Italy, because people living in the north of Italy usually are they have that disposal infrastructure and techs and devices and internet connection, but this is not always the same in the south. In southern Italy, on average, technological resources and infrastructure are lagging behind compared to the north. So this was exceptionally challenging also for children that were trying to do homeschooling in the south. And last thing, this was exceptionally challenging for women. Women in Italy are the caregivers in Italian families. They work, they take care of children, they take care of elderly parents, and often they live with these people in the same small houses a lot of time. So they have to cope with children homeschooling and with elderly people also sometimes affected by the COVID. Moreover, during the lockdown, the incidence of work from home was more frequent among women than among men in Italy. So I would say that nobody talks about these issues in the news, in the media, but women in Italy have been going through an increase in stress and psychological issues during this COVID crisis. So now I would love to learn about Sheida's opinion on this matter.
About the Italian culture, my entire idea came from 1973 movie Amarcord, Fellini's Amarcord, and of course, it's completely distorted. Yeah, Amarcord stands for I remember. Apparently, if I'm wrong, correct me, guys. But yeah, Italy is incredible. It's an incredibly different culture. It has a 3,000 year of history. Rome is or was founded in 753 BC. It's the homeland of the Roman Empire. Excuse me. It's the home of Roman Catholic Church. Italians are known for family, religion, history, arts, architecture, language, and food. It's not surprising that they receive 62 million tourists every year. People come to see them. That is higher than Italy's population. Italy has a currently 60 million population. Now, how do we somehow look at this culture from a theoretical perspective? And at that point, I would like to give you some idea about the cultural resiliency theory. Cultural resiliency theory is little different approach to analyzing the situation. It looks at the society not from top down, but bottom up. In a difficult situation like this, according to the resilience theory, ingenuity is the starting point of resilience. And that sparks in the individuals, not in the society. Once a person triggers that process, then that process somehow spreads at the higher levels in the community, in the country. Therefore, this particular approach it emphasizes differences in people and how that differences somehow melt away as you move from individual to higher levels. It is not like a typical cultural approach where there's culture which is homogenizing force or some sort of a monolithic behavior pattern. It is, in this case, is an understanding. It's a standard or compass of behavior, a set of norms that are acceptable or unacceptable. And the people fall out of those. In their daily lives, they take them as constraints rather than purpose. Therefore, people, individuals, trigger the tenacity, and then that signal will caught by the group, by the community, and it spreads because any outlier draws our attention, and individuality, distinction, sacrifice, individual devotion are the kind of things that grab our attention. And disparity creates incentive for others to look at it, assess first, and then if they like it, if it goes some sort of a threshold, they do the same. Therefore, trailblazing oddity is contagious if it is approved by a certain majority of the others. In this case, in Italy, certainly Italians took their balconies, they took their individual resilience and then moved up to the cities and communities. For instance, March, middle of the March, they were singing the nation's the anthem from the balconies. In those days, one of the videos were very popular. One of the opera singers, Marcini, performing the aria Nessun Dorma from the balcony, and it caught up like a fire, and then it captured the entire country's approach. If I have it, it goes like this. I'm gonna just play only 30 seconds or 15 seconds. How beautiful that is. Yes.
Now, everybody, now we have a few minutes, but wonderful insights, wonderful, very inspiring insights, and a lot of takeaways there. The comment about bottom up, cultural resilience being a bottom up process, starting with the individuals and moving up and spreading throughout the population. The ingenuity and the creativity that is part of resilience is very much alive. I think we've seen this in the Italian case. Amazing ways, remarkable ways, the people themselves, individuals, have responded to the challenge. And I think part of it is what you said. There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of history of disruptions, crises that the Italians have faced for hundreds of years, thousands of years. So I think Italians were able to reach deep into their cultural legacy and find ways to cope with this adversity as well, which is a very positive thing. And this is why we have this session today. We wanted to highlight Italy because it's very unique for a lot of reasons that you mentioned and more. And I think there's lessons here for other societies. There's opportunities for research as well, comparative ways in which societies, different nations and cultures have responded to the pandemic and are still responding. Again, it's a living laboratory. There's a lot of takeaways here. We have just a few minutes, and I want to thank a lot of people here who are with us today. There's a lot of them. Thank you all for being here. But I want to thank in particular to one of our participants, Catalina Munz. Thank you so much for being here and providing a lot of interesting, inspiring questions as well. We may not have time to respond to all of them, but we'll start with a couple of them, and I'll ask Joanna and Francesca to provide some insights. One of the questions Catalina is asking, this cultural resilience, has it been deployed or measured with the diverse cultures, for example, expatriates that live in Italy? And does it differ between older and younger Italians in terms of dealing with the pandemic? Francesca, you did mention that there was a big difference between North and South, and that's kind of legacy of the Italians. But, and then Joanna, you indicated that the gender differences. I mean, the female gender, the woman carrying quite a bit of the burden and creating a very stressful situation and being the pillars of the society, their families as well as the communities. That's very true as well. Do you see other types of diverse responses between, let's say, young and old? Were the older folks more, in a sense, wiser, and they kind of took this with a grain of salt, and they were calmer about the ways in which, even though the older people also paid a hefty price, because a high proportion of the people who were infected were the elderly. So any responses, Francesca, Joanna, to those kinds of thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, Tamir, that on average there has been an adherence of the whole population during the lockdown. So even young, very young people, they were really adhering to rules, even though they're, of course, they're challenged by this. But I would say that on average, the whole population demonstrated to be able to go under strict rules. In terms of minorities, and well, in Italy, we've been through a lot of stresses from migration from Africa, as you know. So there is an issue in Italy about migrations from Africa, and the fact that these people, you don't know whether they have contracted the COVID or not. So we had a lot of fights and a lot of stress and pressure against the fact that each day hundreds of people is coming to Italy from Africa. So this is an health issue as well, and the population is continuously under stress because of this. Probably the government is not really able to provide answers to the problem.
You have some final thoughts, I know. Please go ahead.
We just wanted to say a few things. What have Italians learned in the end from the COVID, and what are we learning? Well, I would say that we've relearned what we tend to unlearn. The fact that a strong public healthcare system is the key basics for any democratic system that aims to achieve its citizens' well-being. Let's not forget that despite the austerity measures that we've been through during the last 20 years, Italy's healthcare system is the second best in the world after France. So we have learned another thing, that we are excellent in being divided on literally every matter, every day, as Sheda was saying in the beginning, but we are capable of being far more united in the face of an emergency. And so COVID-19, in a sense, has amplified a renewed sense of patriotism and national pride. So there is a sort of asymmetry between what our cultural traits are perceived by others and what we've shown to be in difficult times.
Thank you so much, Joanna and Francesca and Sheda. This has been a very stimulating, very inspiring session.